What are the expectations of the corporate traveler, the business traveler today, and how do you see Amex aligning their vision to meet those needs?
We felt that our purpose is to power progress through travel, but then we said, well, how are we going to do that? How exactly are we going to do that? We said, well, 3 areas: economic progress, social progress, and environmental progress. And so those are the 3 areas we've really centered around. Economic progress is, as I just explained, travel is the sort of engine room of commerce. It fuels economic growth, and the pandemic was proof of that. Travel also, I believe, fundamentally, maybe this comes back to some of my early experiences in life, but I do believe that travel drives social progress. I think it builds tolerance, it builds understanding, it builds connections, it builds relationships, and I think these things are just fundamentally important and the foundation of any kind of social progress that happens around the world.
Well, the pandemic proved that.
Absolutely, yeah. And then look, the third one is more, if we want to enjoy the economic benefit of travel and we want to enjoy the social benefits of travel, we've got to make travel more sustainable. Right? We have to ensure that we're doing it responsibly.
Hello and welcome to HX Superheroes, where we explore the full story of human-centered leadership when it comes to making strategic and operational decisions, no matter what your business is. In today's episode, I am so happy to present Paul Abbott, the CEO of American Express Global Business Travel, about the challenges of running a large and highly complex organization and building an independent brand culture after a spin-off from a monster parent brand and creating a positive culture after a challenging period. Paul started his career at British Airways, where he held various roles across marketing, operations, and sales. He joined Amex in 1995, serving in multiple roles that led to the Chief Commercial Officer role, and in 2019, he became the Chief Executive Officer. Amex Global Business Travel is a multinational travel and meetings program management company. It has more than 18,500 employees serving in over 140 countries. From its inception as part of the financial services behemoth American Express that many know, and now as a standalone enterprise for the past 7 years, and publicly traded since May 2022. Amex has delivered on a promise of strong service and a focus on customer needs. Paul, it is such a delight to have you here today in the studio.
Thank you very much.
We always like to kick off these podcasts, getting to know our guests a little bit more. So why don't we start with where it all began?
Where it all began? Oh, well, I'm actually from Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire, not far away from where we are today. That's where I grew up. And my parents, my father worked at British Airways at the airport, and my mum ran a travel agency in the high street in the town where we lived. So
Bit of foreshadowing there.
Exactly. Yeah. Travel was sort of in the blood from early days. And so that was, definitely one of my big sort of influences growing up.
So, I mean, obviously, your parents had a significant impression on your life and obviously your career and some of the career choices that you made. In terms of the intrinsic values, I guess, that you grew up with, how would you say those have informed some of your leadership decisions and how you became a leader of Amex GBT?
Yeah, I think, and I did, like as I say, grow up in a household that was, it sounds strange now, but diverse in the sense that, growing up in the mid-70s, having your Swiss grandmother living with you, having your parents speaking French and Swiss German, and having the ability to travel was an amazing privilege when I was young. With my mum being in the travel industry, my dad working at British Airways, we just had opportunities to travel that really I think shaped my upbringing. We traveled a lot around Asia, Malaysia, and China. We went to India several times, and those are definitely really sort of formative experiences, I think, when you're 10, 12, 14, 16, and you're seeing those parts of the world. And I think that sort of passion for travel, but also that love of a kind of diverse environment, really left a strong impression on me growing up, for sure.
Many people probably don't know this, but our paths crossed some years back. I don't want to date either of us, But
I think I've already given that away when I said mid-70s.
Yeah, exactly. It's not too long after, I think it was the dot-com bubble, I ended up started working for American Express. You were running the Canadian arm of that business. And then our paths crossed once again not too long ago when a business that I was running, we ended up selling that to Amex GBT and spun off the technology division to another company. In terms of your career, do you want to maybe just step through sort of where you started and then, of course, how you got into the role that you're in today?
Yeah, that's a long journey. Yeah. But no, I mean, I left school at 16. So I went to a grammar school, and then I left school after my O-levels. Technically, I was actually still 15 because my birthday's in July, so I was one of those young ones in the year. And it sounds strange to say that now because there's a lot of pressure, I think, on kids to sort of go into higher education and go to university and get a degree. But it wasn't that unusual back then. I think about half the class that I was in left school at that point. Wow. Because there were a lot of opportunities at that age. There were a lot of apprenticeship programs, and so it wasn't that unusual. Yeah. I actually started work. My parents had retired, but they bought a pub and restaurant in the Oxfordshire countryside, beautiful little place called Woolston, the White Horse at Woolston, one of the many pubs that claims to be the oldest in the country. And so I went to work there. I went to work in the kitchens, in the bar, at my parents' pub restaurant, and then I'd probably still be there now if my dad hadn't kicked me out and told me to get a proper job. And so I ended up joining an apprenticeship program at British Airways.
British Airways, yeah.
And that was actually a really good balance for me because, you kind of spent 3 weeks working, and then the fourth week you spent at college, and I was doing a business studies qualification. Yeah. And that really worked well for me because, I had a job, I was earning money, I had the sort of structure and discipline of working and an income, but I also was able to sort of keep my studies going. So that led to various roles at British Airways in operations and in finance, and then I moved into marketing finance, and then I moved into sales, and then I moved into sort of more senior positions in sales and marketing. Mm-hmm. And then so I was at British Airways for 9 years, and then I came across to join Amex to run what was sort of half of the travel business in the UK at the time. Amex had bought Thomas Cook. And so Eric Brannan, who was the head of the travel business in Europe, wanted somebody who was a neutral, who wasn't an Amex person, wasn't a Thomas Cook person. I had a lot of respect for Eric. We had a very good relationship, and he twisted my arm, and I joined Amex on the travel side. And then I moved into the payment side of the business, and then I spent basically 20 years in payments. Yep. And then obviously more recently joined the board of Amex GBT, and then I was on the board for 2 years before I became CEO in 2019. So that's the fast version. Yeah.
One thing that I know that American Express is known for is the investment and development of their leadership.
Yeah.
How important is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, hugely important. I think at Amex, I was very fortunate to work with and for a lot of just really, really smart, talented people in an environment that I think really values strong leadership. And I think that sort of commitment to continuous improvement that exists at Amex, I think made a huge difference to me personally. I would say it was less about the sort of formal investment that Amex made in you as a leader, and more about just the quality and standard of leadership in the company and the people that you learned from and that you got to work with.
Yeah, and the culture that is within that organization.
Yeah, very strong culture, very strong values. And, as I say, a culture that really believes in the strength of leadership and values it and recognizes and promotes people based on that leadership strength. So I think there was a huge influence on me, definitely.
What would you say are the strongest qualities of strong leadership in your opinion?
Well, look, I think trust is the foundation of any successful relationship, in business or personally. And so I think, you have to be someone that can build strong levels of trust for that to be the foundation of the relationships that you have. I do think authenticity is incredibly important. You've got to find your own path and your own style. And I think that's closely linked to building trust. You have to be authentic. Then, I think for me, the ability to create clarity for people when you're leading large teams is very, very important. And to create a sense of belief. Belief is such a powerful force. If you can create that sense of belief in the people around you, that something incredible can be achieved, and people know exactly what that is, then that's a really wonderful combination. So, I do think that sort of combination of clarity and belief makes a huge difference.
What for the aspiring leaders, those kids that are coming out of university, college, business degrees, whatever degree, what advice would you have for them today, 20, 30 years on?
Yeah, I think sometimes, people are looking for that sort of silver bullet and that magic piece of leadership advice. For me, it was just about getting a little bit better every single day. I would always reflect, whether it was on a flight or on a train on the way home, or just sitting at home watching TV. I always reflect on the day and think about interactions that could have gone better, or customer meetings that I could have managed better. And so I don't know why I always do that. I don't know if anyone told me to do that. It's just something that's very much embedded in the way that I operate. I do like to reflect on almost everything that I do, and I have an almost sort of automatic process for thinking, I could have done that a little bit better. Next time I'd adjust the way I did that. And I almost sort of replay in my mind when I delivered certain messages, how that was received in the room, and maybe how certain conversations went. And so I just think that ability to reflect on your own performance, that strong level of introspection, being honest with yourself about where you can improve, and just committing to get that little bit better, each and every day. If there is a magic silver bullet out there, then great. But for me, it wasn't. It was really just, I just think, if you can get 1 or 2% better every single week, it makes a huge difference over time. Yeah.
And do you try to implement that into your business, into the culture of your business, into how you're the expectation that you would set with your leadership group?
Definitely. I think you have to create this sort of culture of, what sometimes, I call divine discontent. Meaning you can't be satisfied with how things are. Yeah. But you have to have a positive motivation around that dissatisfaction, right? Sort of divine discontent, right? It's okay to be, sometimes I'm fiercely critical of things that I did 6 months, 12 months, 24 months ago. And I know people have sat around the table thinking, yeah, but you did that. That was your decision. Why are you so critical of it? Because you have to, I think, be prepared to just go back in time and really, critique the things that you did and find ways to improve. And so I think, I do think it's really important to embed that in the culture. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds to me as though that really is the hallmark of authenticity as a leader, or as an employee, or as an individual, right? When you think about it, self-reflection.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference.
So the question that I've certainly been wanting to ask, and I'm sure will be really interesting to those that are listening into the podcast, is you joined the largest travel company in the world about 6 months prior to the pandemic.
Yes.
What is it like leading a company of that size through a global pandemic when your entire business model effectively goes from strength to strength to now you're faced with a crisis that you're now having to figure out how you're going to navigate?
Yeah, well, it was certainly a very, very challenging period. I mean, this might sound like a strange thing to say, but if you're going to you're going to face a kind of situation like this, it actually came at a good time for me, because I was 6 months in. We had used that first 6 months in the job to build out a new 5-year strategy for the business. we'd actually brought the top 140 people together in the company in February of 2020 when, we knew that COVID existed, but it was something happening, in Asia, and people weren't quite sure how it was going to develop. I had 140 people together in Orlando for a meeting launching this new 5-year strategy for the business. 60 days later, our revenues were minus 85%. And so why was it a good time? Because, with a very clear direction set for the business, we had that North Star, we had that sort of compass for the business, and you could sort of reflect on, well, how do we frankly use the circumstances that we're in to accelerate parts of this strategy? And actually, we found that there were quite a number of elements of the strategy that we could accelerate. So, for example, we wanted to make a lot of changes to our infrastructure and our platforms because we'd made a series of acquisitions, and we were planning to make those changes over a 2-3 year period because it's a very sensitive change when you have a big servicing organization. Yeah. But with very little volume, we could accelerate all those platform and technology changes. We also had a clear strategy to acquire new capabilities. We wanted to really increase our capabilities, particularly the software solutions that we had for SME customers. And we wanted to add some premium leisure and real sort of high-touch travel servicing capabilities. And again, we thought, actually, these circumstances will bring certain companies into play that may not, frankly, have been in play if it wasn't for the economic conditions that we're in. And then there were also a series of cultural changes I wanted to make in the company. And I really honestly understood very early on that we were in a defining moment, for me personally as a leader and for us as a business. And I was experienced enough to know that when you're in these defining moments, that every decision that you take is amplified. And that is an opportunity, for good or bad. Yep. But for me, I wanted to use that as an opportunity for good. And I wanted to use it as an opportunity to really accelerate some of the cultural changes that I wanted to happen in the company. And I just frankly knew that given the circumstances, I was going to have everybody's attention on every decision that I took. And then I could use that as a platform to accelerate some of that cultural change. So I think fundamentally, you have to see the opportunities in any situation that you're in. Obviously, it was incredibly challenging. We had to make a lot of very, very difficult decisions. But I think we were as preoccupied with survival and navigating through the challenges as we were seeing the opportunities and really capitalizing on the opportunities. And so like I said at the beginning, it sounds like a strange thing to say, but the timing of it in some ways, not that I would wish it upon anyone, right. But if it had to happen at some point, happening when you have a very, very clear roadmap in front of you was actually helpful in some ways.
Would it be fair to say that actually that was a catalyst for you then to make those changes that would ultimately lead to listing the company in recent years?
It definitely accelerated that. I mean, again, that was something that we had planned for the future. We actually took our 5-year plan and that we communicated in February 2020, and we just said, look, in these circumstances, 5 years is just way too long. We don't even know what's going to happen in 12 months. So we actually made it a 3-year plan. And we said, look, we've got 2.5 years left of the 3-year plan. We need to accelerate the execution across all the key strategies. And that was one of them. Yep. And we actually had a very simple roadmap. We said, look, let's make the strategic acquisitions we want to make. Let's reposition the company to be much more of a software and services company, not just a services company. Yeah. So let's build out the software capabilities. Let's position ourselves as a software and services company. Let's make sure that we take advantage, frankly, of some of the infrastructure changes that we were able to make. And then let's position ourselves to go public. And that was our sort of 2-year plan. And we executed on it. And I know that may sound simple sitting here now, but when we decided to do that, our revenues were minus 85%. And you didn't even really know exactly where the end of the pandemic was coming. So it was a pretty interesting set of circumstances.
I mean, it's incredible when you think about it, and I'm sure you look back on it with hindsight and go, "Wow, how do we actually pull this off?" But I suspect that you needed the strong support of the board and your investors, and more importantly, the strong support of your people.
Yeah, no question. I mean, we were fortunate to come into the pandemic well capitalized with a strong balance sheet. That was obviously very helpful. We also have very supportive shareholders, long-term supportive shareholders, obviously, very, very helpful. And we had a very motivated, committed team. I mean, the sacrifices people made through that period of time were just incredible. And, in those sorts of circumstances, I knew that there would be winners and losers from the pandemic.
Yep.
And we were very focused on being one of the winners. And we wanted to frankly we talked about emerging from the pandemic with stronger relationships with customers, with our suppliers, and with each other. And that was actually one of the key mantras that sort of led us through. It wasn't achieve this financial objective. It wasn't, to become a public company. It was actually, look, let's get through this very difficult set of circumstances with a stronger reputation and stronger relationships with customers, with suppliers, and each other. That was the mantra as we went through it. And I think that served us really, really well because it focused people on making the right decisions for the right reasons.
That's great. What you talked about some of the cultural changes that you enacted that you wanted to put in place in order to take the company through that period. When you reflect back on it, what were some of the most important things that needed to take place culturally to help transform the business to get where it is today?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to maybe reflect on the journey of the business because the company was separated out from American Express in 2015. And it was a bit like, when your kids leave home, they kind of rebel against anything that the parents, say. And Amex GBT.
I'm not there yet.
We went through. No, I know you're not, but I've been through that. The company went through that sort of period of time where it was really asserting its independence, right? and really creating its identity. And I think in doing so, left some of perhaps the real strengths and the values of American Express. And so I wanted to restore some of the really, really good, strong values that I had experienced at Amex, but at the same time retain and accelerate some of the sort of dynamic, more agile and more levels of, sort of creativity and innovation that had come from this separation of the business from Amex, and frankly the injection of private equity investors that had a different level of expectation, different level of urgency, and frankly in some cases different set of objectives, medium term. And so it was sort of bringing these two areas together.
Yeah,
and,
that's not an easy thing to do.
I know it sounds, but it's sort of how do we create the best of both worlds here? Create this stability and strength, but really inject the agility and the speed and the innovation. So that was the magic that we were trying to create. And I'm not sitting here, declaring victory on that. It's a everyday battle, right? But I think we've made massive progress. Yeah. I think the culture has shifted tremendously in that 3-year period.
Yeah, I kind of reflect back on my own experience. I joined the company that I now run, Forsta, just as the pandemic hit, and we went through a massive amount of change, cultural, transformational, operational. We bought 4 businesses. We got acquired in the 2-year time. The story I like to tell is we did all of this sort of in isolation, virtually. I didn't actually meet anyone in the business, and didn't meet anyone on the board, didn't meet my management team. And you talk about culture and the importance of having people prepared to make these sacrifices. And I was amazed at what people were willing to do, and the fact that I had our key leadership that were managing 3 of their children's homework and homeschooling them at the same time. Their partners were, and then to have to go through that and communication, creating a set of values that people were willing to back, and then consistently and most importantly, sort of implementing those into the daily sort of rigor as you're executing against this plan is no mean feat. So with different sort of investors' expectations and objectives. Now I think about that at our scale we're 500 people, we're almost 1,000 now, compared to almost 20,000. It's not something that happens overnight. What was the biggest lesson learned, you think, coming out of that for you?
But in some respects, when your revenues are down 85% and people aren't traveling, shareholder metrics really go out the window. So you get back to, well, what are fundamentally the most important qualities in this business that are going to get us through this?
Yeah.
And you come back to making sure that you have people who are energized and motivated and committed, and that people are investing in the long-term attributes of the business that you need when you come out of the pandemic. It just obviously the pendulum swung, frankly, towards culture and leadership. And I think that the challenge for me was actually, so coming out of the pandemic, how do I sustain that?
Right.
How do I sustain those levels of teamwork and collaboration and commitment? When you get into a more normalized environment, do some of the old behaviors start to, reemerge? Yeah. And so we actually, we're pretty conscious about, with some very, very positive leadership changes here and cultural changes, how do we sustain them in a different environment? So yeah, I think that was one of the key learnings for us.
Especially and I know that Amex historically has done a pretty good job in terms of balancing sort of the virtual in-person. Did that have an impact on some of those decisions that you made post-pandemic, if we want to call it that?
Well, I'd say we were quite fortunate in that we were quite a virtual organization before the pandemic. 80% of our workforce in the US, for example, already worked from home. Some people think about our business, and maybe they don't appreciate, actually 76% of the transactions that we do come through digital channels. So they either come through our software platforms or third-party software. So we are, very much a sort of digital-first business.
Yeah.
We don't have large call centers. The people who are providing the service they all work from home, and they were all connected up basically through the cloud, through the VPN connections pre-pandemic.
Yep.
So that was actually a real advantage for us culturally. We were already used to working in a remote environment, but also structurally in terms of our infrastructure. Some companies had a terrible time, adapting to the pandemic because they were in large physical call center operations and had no remote working capabilities. So that was very fortunate that we just didn't skip a beat from a servicing perspective.
Right.
And culturally, people were already used to working in an environment where it was remote. So I think that definitely helped us.
Yeah. You've been quoted as saying travel is a force for good, powering progress, right, through travel.
Yeah.
How do you relay that to the end customer, your business traveler, right? We talk a lot about customer experience and how important that is. Where do you see the roadmap that you've laid out as you look to sort of change the dynamic of the business from more of a services-based company to a software-based company? Clearly, the customer experience is a critical part of that. You've been in the travel industry for a very, very long time. What are the expectations of the corporate traveler, the business traveler today versus, let's say, 10 years ago? And how do you see Amex aligning their vision to meet those needs?
Well, I guess the first piece around travel being a force for good, that led to some work we did on our purpose as a company. And we wanted to make sure that we had that really clear kind of North Star. And the experiences of the pandemic definitely influenced it, definitely shaped it, because when you think about that experience, we experienced a world where people couldn't travel. We experienced a world where in-person connections were disrupted. And it had a profound impact. We saw record drops in GDP. We saw record increases in unemployment. We saw record increases in mental health issues. And so it was very clear that the world, was a far less understanding, far less tolerant, far less successful place, without travel. And so, I think taking those experiences into this exercise of what is the purpose of the company, we felt that, our purpose is to power progress through travel. But then we said, well, how are we going to do that? How exactly are we going to do that? We said, well, 3 areas: economic progress, social progress, and environmental progress. And so those are the 3 areas we've really centered around. Economic progress is, as I just explained, travel is the sort of engine room of commerce. Yep. It fuels economic growth, and the pandemic was proof of that. Travel also, I believe, fundamentally, maybe this comes back to some of my early experiences in life, but I do believe that travel drives social progress. I think it builds tolerance, it builds understanding, it builds connections, it builds relationships, and I think these things are just fundamentally important and the foundation of any kind of social progress that happens around the world.
Well, the pandemic proved that.
Absolutely, yeah. And then look, the third one is more, if we want to enjoy the economic benefit of travel and we want to enjoy the social benefits of travel, we've got to make travel more sustainable. Right? We have to ensure that we're doing it responsibly. And so those are the 3 kind of pillars of our purpose as a company. So everything that we do ladders up to how are we driving more economic progress, how are we driving more social progress, and how are we driving more environmental progress. And that really is the North Star for the company.
Fantastic. What's your view on travel in 10 years from now?
Well, I think look at the way demand has come back. There is a tremendous appetite to travel. The leisure travel industry has already been back above 2019 for some time. Business travel is approximately 70-75% of 2019. So I think travel will absolutely continue to grow, and it will grow at or above GDP. Yeah. No question. I do think that the experience of the pandemic has brought service back front and center, which I think is really, really good. We went through a period of time where travel was more complex and more challenging, and I think that has raised the bar in terms of people's expectations of service going forward. So I think that is absolutely critical. I think you mentioned it earlier, there was a real acceleration of a drive towards digital channels, and I think that is absolutely continuing and will also be an even more important part of our business going forward. And then sustainability, I think, is going to be, critically important. And so I think, look, more demand is absolutely, the future of travel. I think definitely an increased focus on the traveler experience, definitely an increased focus on digital channels, and an increased focus on sustainability. Those are the things that I think those are the trends that are shaping, let's just say, the next 3 to 5 years.
Great. Now, it wouldn't be an HX Superheroes podcast if I didn't get to ask you this standard question, which is, what has been your best customer experience?
Well,
why?
Right? Of course, who's going to have delivered my best customer experience? It's Amex GBT.
Of course.
Of course. But, it genuinely is. I mean, I know this is self-serving, Carl, but here goes anyway. I went just after I joined. Actually, I woke up in New York. And on the Amex GBT app, I had a notification saying, your flight has been cancelled. Please, message us. So I go onto the app, I press the live chat service, I get a message back straight away saying, don't worry about it. Flight's been cancelled. We've rebooked you on another flight at 11 o'clock. We've changed your limousine service. Also, we noticed that you're traveling with your colleague, Mr. Shirek. We've also rebooked him, and you guys are all set. Go back to bed. You can leave in 2.5 hours for your later flight. That is a regular experience with us, and for me, that kind of using digital channels to proactively deal with customer problems before the customer's even aware of them, like being able to wake up and be told I had a problem that's already solved, that's what great customer service is all about. And yeah, like I said, that's a regular feature of the service that we offer through the app and the live chat functionality. So
it's great to hear about that live and in person, because I mean, most of our listeners, this is what they do day in and day out, is figuring out ways in which they can predict events before they even happen.
Yeah.
To deliver the optimum customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's called proactive traveler care, and it's designed to literally, as you say, advise you that you have either a delay or a cancellation, but solve that problem for you before you even know about it. Yeah. And look, I'm not saying that is possible 100% of the time, but when it works, it's that real moment of truth for the customer when the customer has that disruption and that serious challenge. Yeah. And if you can deliver in those moments of truth, those moments that matter, then it makes such a huge difference to your brand and your experience.
I couldn't agree more. So if you had a leadership superpower, Paul, what would it be?
Well, I think it comes back to what I said earlier. I do think creating clarity and belief, those things really, I think back to my leadership successes over the years, and it's when I've been able to create clarity of purpose, clarity of vision, clarity of priorities, clarity of values, and create this real sense of belief that anything is possible. I think that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. It's great to hear that from you. Last question I've got for you is, and it's a tricky one, but if you could go back in time and change the trajectory of your career, or change your career and do something different, is there anything you'd do differently? Is there any different career path you might have taken?
I mean, that's actually an easy question for me, because yes, I really wanted to be an architect, and I love architecture, I love design, and I just sort of managed to fulfill my dream of actually building a house from scratch. I bought a plot of land and built a house. So I got that out of my system. Although I built it through the pandemic, which was not necessarily the easiest thing to do.
There's a bit of a shortage of supply.
But it did confirm to me two things. One, I wouldn't have been a very good architect. But two, I really loved it. I mean, I really, really loved it. And so yeah, I would definitely have gone into some field of architecture and designing and building, because it's just something I really, really enjoy.
It's interesting you say that, because my father was an architect.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I grew up, and some of my fondest memories were coming home from school, and he'd be sitting at the kitchen counter, on his sketch pad, constantly thinking, constantly designing, constantly creating. I didn't get a lot of that.
Yeah.
but yeah, no, that's it's fantastic.
That would definitely be my path.
Wow. Well, Paul, it's been an absolute privilege getting to spend time with you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to come and join us. I know that your thoughts and sentiments will be well taken on board by many of our listeners. So thank you again.
Great to see you, Colin. Thanks for the opportunity.
Likewise.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Okay. We could have done that all day.
I know, that was easy. That was great, Paul.